Okay, I think we've got it.
Hey, thanks for that, Scott. Appreciate you so much. Welcome everyone. Welcome to our CAG meeting tonight, Portland Harbor Community Advisory Group. Tonight we're going to be talking about McCormick Baxter and the Portland Botanical Gardens. We have DEQ here, EPA, and folks from the Portland Botanical Garden here as well. So it's great to see everyone joining us tonight too. We have a good turnout tonight, which is fantastic. Before we start though, we'd like to do a land acknowledgement. So I'm going to have Sarah Taylor come over here and do that real quick.
Okay, hi everyone. I've been doing a lot of land acknowledgements over the last couple of years, and tonight I just want to kind of acknowledge that we all know and understand that this is the traditional indigenous lands of many tribes. And so what I really want to do is do a call out to action, and that call out is that we all know that we signed treaties saying that we would make sure that the tribes could fish and hunt and gather. And I just want to ask that our call out for action tonight and forevermore is that we are always looking through the lens of honoring those treaties. And not just because someone signed them, but because we know it's the right thing to do. So, you know, whether we could make more money, if we do something different, if we could get around the law, or even if the law says we don't have to do it, I just want us to all begin to say, okay, we're about to do something, we're about to decide something, and does this acknowledge in our actions that we know that this is the land of the tribes and that we did make that promise. So that's what I'm doing today for our land acknowledgement, is just calling out that lens. So I'm going to hand you some glasses, and I'm going to ask you to look through that lens from now on. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks for that acknowledgement. I really appreciate it. Yeah, it's a good lens to have for sure. With that, we do have a few announcements that I would like to share with folks. So you all probably know that we have the Laura Willamette Speaks at the gallery at the Lloyd Center, which is in the old, what's the name of that shop? Ann Taylor, yeah, it's the old Ann Taylor shop at the Lloyd Center. If you wish to go and visit, take a group, I encourage you to. It's really quite beautiful. It's a great exhibit. We're going to put Sarah Taylor's phone number and Jan Zuckerman's phone number in the chat so you can reach out to them. It is worth your while. We've had a really great turnout with a lot of state officials to come and see it and city officials to come and see the gallery. We've brought some school groups there, and we also been having some coalition meetings there. So, you know, please take out some time to check it out. I kind of feel like the whole spirit of Lloyd Center is like lifted since we've started this gallery. So if you have some time, please check it out, especially on a rainy day, because you can walk around inside, which is kind of nice. The other announcement I have is Rumble on the River Community Forum number 6 will be happening on Thursday, April 20th. They're going to have some info tables there as well. The panelists will start at 6:30. This is at St. John's Church at 8044 North Richmond Avenue here in St. John. Also, for members who are part of Portland Harbor Community Coalition, they will be combining their monthly meeting with the community forum. So for those of you who go to PHCC's meeting, just so that you know that their monthly meeting will be combined there. Also would like for folks to save the date on the Portland Harbor virtual casual community coffee chat with EPA. That's Friday, April 28th, from 12 to 1. I'm sure Laura will be excited to see you there. So save that date, and she will be sending out an announcement for folks for the community coffee chat. On April 26th, Portland Harbor CAG will be having an additional meeting with Skeo, who is assisting EPA with information gathering. This meeting will be an introduction, will be an opportunity for folks to meet Skeo, and they want to gather information from the city of Portland, property owners, key community partners in the area about, well, they actually wanted to know a better understanding for the long-range future of Portland Harbor Superfund Site. So they're going to be joining us on April 26th to kind of talk about the future of the harbor as we're moving towards cleanup. Okay, so my last announcement is Barbara Bernstein's movie, Once a Braided River, will be screening at Cinema 21 on 616 Northwest 21st Avenue on Tuesday, May 16th at 7 p.m. So this is a new documentary that Barbara Bernstein has created. I think some of you are familiar with Barbara. She does Locus Focus on KBOO. This is a beautiful film. It's a great documentary, and it really does our river justice. It's really great, and I'm just super excited that she has put in so much energy and love into getting this out to folks. So you're a real blessing, Barbara. Thank you so much. So with all that information, I think we're going to go ahead and pass this over to EPA. Laura Newton with EPA is going to help facilitate the meeting tonight. And Laura, do I need to make you a host, or are you able to?
Oh, yes, if you could make me a host, that would be great, because I am going to share my screen at some point. Thank you. Take your time.
I'm going to mute myself, and then I'm going to make you a host here. Let me do that real quick.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Michael, just so you know, the voice that's coming through, your voice that's coming through is weak. It sounds cloudy and garbled a little bit. And so if there is a way for you to correct that, this would be a good time. You're on mute right now, buddy.
Sorry about that, folks. I hope everyone got that information. We were hoping to put those announcements in the chat as well. So if our Wi-Fi may be a little precarious, so we're working on it. But if you missed those announcements, they should go into the chat as well. So I'm going to make.
Sounds good. Yeah, and I can hear you just fine, just so you know, Michael, and folks in the room. It is just like a little bit fuzzy, but oh, it looks like Tom, you have did you want to say anything, Tom?
Yeah, I put it in the chat. The DEQ rulemaking on the fuel tank seismic stability. They're going to have their advisory committee meeting on April 21st. I put it in chat. Please go to it in the link, and it tells you that you can't say anything unless you're in the group, but it's a good thing to monitor, given that the CEI hub is a major issue with all of us. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that there, Tom. And we have so many people on here. I'm looking for you, Laura. Let me get you here so we can get you to see here real quick here. So thanks for your patience, everyone. Oh, here we go.
Call one.
Okay. All right. So you should be co-host now. I'm going to mute myself and let you let you drive this
Awesome.
show, okay?
Sounds good. And I see, great. Okay, cool. I have the ability, so I will go ahead and share our first slide. I just want to say, first of all, thank you all so much for having us this evening. Tom, do you have a question for Michael? Like a general question before we start, or you're on mute, Tom?
I'm lowered.
Okay. Okay, sounds good. Just want to check. No worries. So I just want to say thank you so much for having us in this space tonight, to the community advisory group, and just thank you. So tonight we're going to start, I'm going to be just facilitating the first presentation that EPA and DEQ are giving on the McCormick and Baxter Superfund Site redevelopment. And so just before we get started with the presenters who will introduce, before they present their sections, we'll start with EPA and then go to DEQ. I just want to say I'll be facilitating virtually, and then Alyssa Bonini with Triangle Associates, who's a contractor to EPA, who has provided support for the CAG before, will be the in-room facilitator. So thank you, Alyssa. And just a few facilitator requests before we get going, is a couple of things. One, for questions and discussion, I want to go over how that's going to work for this. We want to go ahead and go through the full content of the EPA and DEQ presentations first, mainly so that there's a complete recording of the content for people who are looking at the CAG recording after. And don't worry, there'll be plenty of time for questions and discussion after these presentations. And then I know after us, the Portland Botanical Gardens are going. But after our section, there'll be time for questions after EPA and DEQ present. And you can, throughout the presentation, put your questions in the chat, and I'll be tracking them online. Or Alyssa in the room, I think, has some cards that if you want to write your questions down as you're thinking about them, feel free, and then Alyssa will collect those as we're doing the presentations too. And after the presentations, we'll just be going online and in the room. And I will be keeping track of all the questions in a parking lot. I'm happy to screen share it at some point too, because I know we hopefully will have time to get to everything, but if we don't, I'll have them, and we'll make sure for EPA and DEQ related questions to follow up. And if there's general feedback questions that maybe are outside the scope of EPA and DEQ, I'll make sure to give those to the community advisory group after too. And lastly, just there's some shared group agreements that I'd like to just go over. The community advisory group is part of the Portland Harbor Collaborative, which some of you may be familiar with. It's a community-driven group that meets quarterly, and the CAG is part of that. And one of the things that group has done, and Alyssa actually and her team facilitate that group as a third-party neutral facilitator, is put some group agreements together. And I'm not going to go through all of them. It took a long time for that group to do this, but I'd like to encourage everyone to follow these as best they can tonight. And that's why Alyssa and I are here. I think everyone does a great job of this, but I know that this topic is really important to community members who are on tonight and to others who are interested in this area. And so just a few things. One, definitely want everyone to participate. It's really these first four I'm going to focus on here. You can see my screen, all right? Just want to make sure, right? The group agreements, everyone can see them, okay? Okay, good. So mainly, we want everyone to participate, but also take space and make space. So if you have a lot of questions, Alyssa and I, if you can kind of start with one question, and then we'll come back to you. We just want to make sure that people have a chance to speak and everyone has a chance to speak. So start with one question. If you have others, that's awesome, and we'll come back to you, or we'll answer them, if we can't get to all of the questions later too. And then really listen to understand. And, so if you don't agree or are uncertain about a comment, asking a question that kind of explores that uncertainty is helpful, and listening with respect to the answer. And then number 4, I think, especially for this topic, is good to remember just addressing the idea, not the person. So really focusing, on kind of the subject matter, and that just treating each other with respect and dignity, whether that's the presenters tonight or the people in the room, or if you're asking a question, just always good to remember. So thank you all so much for taking these into consideration. Really, I just wanted to focus on the first 4 because I know that there's a lot, but self-care is also important. So that being said, I know the main content is what everyone's excited about, so let's just jump into that. But any questions about these group agreements before we get started, or any of the facilitation piece? Okay, cool. All right, so let's get started. So we're going to start with the EPA presenters first, and then, as I said, go into the DEQ piece. And so for the first part of tonight's presentation, just in general, EPA, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality, DEQ, tonight we're going to be talking about their roles in supporting the reuse efforts at the McCormick and Baxter Superfund Site. And so, hold on one second. One moment. I think we want to make sure that we have the right one. And as I'm going through this, if you want to send me the one that you think, feel free. So I think we're going to go ahead and get started. So Ann Christopher is the EPA Remedial Project Manager for the McCormick and Baxter Superfund Site. And then Kat West is the Senior Associate at Skeo Solutions. So Skeo is a contractor to EPA, and Kat is a National Redevelopment Expert. And so we'll be starting with them and then going into the DEQ presenters who I will reintroduce. So Ann, do you want to go ahead and get started? And if for some reason these slides look different, let me know and we can stop and we make sure we have the right version.
Sure, no problem. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
And is my video working?
I think so. Let's see. I'm trying to find you. Yes, I can see you. Perfect.
Okay, great. As Laura said, my name's Ann Christopher. I'm the project manager for EPA for McCormick and Baxter. And let's just jump right in. So next slide. As you all know, McCormick and Baxter is within Portland Harbor, but it is its own Superfund site. So you can see it's on the east bank of the Willamette River, and it's right near the Union Pacific and BNSF railroads. University of Portland is to the south, and the Cathedral Park and Willamette Cove areas of Portland Harbor are to the north of the site. The site is about 40 acres of upland property and 23 acres of a sediment cap in water. Next slide. There are 3 operable units for the remedy at McCormick and Baxter. There is an upland soil cap, like I just said, that's about 40 acres. There's a sediment cap in water, and then the groundwater remedy has a couple components. There's a groundwater barrier wall, which you can kind of see in the figure. The light yellow area is an impermeable cap, and the line around that is the groundwater barrier wall. That extends about 80 feet deep, and it's containing the NAPL that's still underground. The impermeable cap that it's on top of the groundwater barrier wall area helps to keep precipitation out of that area. And then there was NAPL extraction for a number of years that ended around 2011. Next slide. So getting Superfund sites reused can be pretty challenging. There are complicated environmental conditions associated with each site. There are usually site restrictions, which we can go over on a couple of slides. And there's usually ongoing responsibilities for maintaining a remedy. So for instance, those caps that I was talking about, the impermeable cap really can't be permeated, because then the precipitation will enter the groundwater barrier wall area. There are also liability risks with owning a Superfund site, and some sites have liens on them, and McCormick and Baxter is an example of that. And then there's also just the stigma of owning a Superfund site. So many sites around the country, unfortunately, remain physically abandoned and vacant for decades, but getting these sites into reuse and having a good steward with the next owner is critical to EPA's mission. So let's take a minute to understand why this is important. First, we'll start with a really, a really important fact is that EPA does not own Superfund site properties, nor does it control who owns the property or who it gets sold to and what the next reuse is going to be. So we need to find the next owner that's going to be a very good steward and that the reuse will be compatible with the remedy. And so EPA supports the reuse efforts because it brings significant benefits to both the remedy itself and to the community. So the list on the right, you can see that a good site steward with the next owner would help prevent vandalism at the site, theft, or fires. It could help with ongoing remedy responsibilities, like I was mentioning, maintaining those caps as an example. It would be implementation of necessary site restrictions to protect human health and the environment. And an example at McCormick and Baxter is limiting the use of groundwater at the site. There can be a reduction of ongoing costs to taxpayers because if the new owner agrees to take on some of the maintenance responsibilities, then that would mean that EPA and the state wouldn't have to pay for those responsibilities. There can be some reimbursement of the cleanup costs that the agencies have spent in the sale of the property. And so the last community benefit example is just that if there's a new owner and it's generating tax, then that would come back to the city. Next slide. So the Superfund redevelopment process can happen at any point during the stage of a Superfund cleanup. So obviously McCormick and Baxter was cleaned up in the early 2000s, and there has been an ongoing Superfund redevelopment effort at the site this whole time. And as Michael mentioned, Skeo is also going to be working with Portland Harbor on some redevelopment outreach. And so for Portland Harbor, it's starting, before the cleanup, and for McCormick and Baxter, it's been going this whole time, and we're just still waiting for a new owner to take on this property. So the reuse effort can happen as you're designing a remedy, while the remedy is being implemented and the site is being cleaned up, and it can also happen post-construction, as is the case for McCormick and Baxter. Next slide. So there are different roles for entities during the Superfund redevelopment process. As you can see on this slide, the current property owner, like I said, EPA does not own the site. So the McCormick and Baxter Creosoting Company is still the current property owner. The current owner decides who to sell or donate the property to. And the owner normally coordinates with EPA to ensure that the prospective new owner is fully informed before taking on responsibilities of owning a Superfund site. We definitely don't want a new owner to walk into owning a Superfund site without knowing what type of effort they're taking on. For the prospective new owner, they would definitely want to coordinate with EPA and DEQ to fully understand the site restrictions, what their responsibilities will be as a new owner of a Superfund site, what liability protections they should seek or could seek. And if there are liens on the site, they would seek to resolve those liens before taking title of the property. So EPA has talked to a number of different entities that have been interested in purchasing the property over the many years that it's been cleaned up. And we tell all the entities the same description of the responsibilities, the site restrictions, etc. The prospective new owner should also work with local government on necessary land use issues, like how the site is zoned, what will be allowed on that type of zoning, and then on any kind of approvals or permits they would need for whichever type of activity they choose to do on the property after they buy it. And then the new owner could also work with community members for project support. And then ultimately the goal is that the prospective new owner would become a good site steward. So the community's role in the Superfund redevelopment process is that you guys can participate in the reuse planning efforts to help determine cleanup goals and help local governments with the planning efforts that they'll be doing with the new owner. So this meeting is an example of that. And then Kat will get into the prospective purchaser agreement process where there's another opportunity. The community can provide input to the local government on development planning and the permit decisions that they make. And then potentially the community could also meet with the new developers to seek project support. For the local government, in some ways, they play the biggest role in Superfund reuse because they control the land use and how it's zoned. So they create the comprehensive plans, zoning, permitting processes, transportation access, etc., which will govern how the site can be reused. So when a new reuse is proposed, the local government reviews and either approves or denies the plans for the redevelopment efforts. And many communities such as Portland request community input on those decisions that the local government is making. But the local government usually doesn't own the site property, although in some instances, local governments do end up acquiring a site for public use, such as municipal buildings or parks or for housing. That's not the case for Portland Harbor. Sorry, McCormick and Baxter. So then for EPA's role, the first priority is to make sure that the site remains protective of human health and the environment. EPA ensures the sites are protected through a suite of strategies and tools, including specific site restrictions, such as prohibiting use of groundwater, which I've mentioned, or anything that could disturb the caps that we have in place, but also by ensuring that any new owners are fully informed about the site and how they can maintain good stewardship of the property. And just a note, if the site is reused in a manner that damages the cleanup and remedy or causes a release of hazardous substances, EPA has legal authority under the Superfund law to intervene. And then that new owner would then be responsible for cleaning up whatever release they've caused. So second, EPA funds technical assistance to communities to facilitate reuse planning and cleanups. The purpose is multifold, including helping to determine the goals and standards during the early stages of the cleanup, and also to help communities and local governments think through and plan for the reuse of the property through zoning changes, or possibly the public acquisition of the property. Like I mentioned, sometimes local government does end up acquiring the property. So an example of this is the Skeo effort that they're about to start for the Portland Harbor reuse discussions with the community. McCormick and Baxter did receive this type of technical assistance funding back in 2001, and we'll get to that in a minute. And lastly, EPA provides information about the site to all prospective new owners that approach the current owner. And we provide that information about the site restrictions and responsibilities because it's critical that we ensure that the remedy remains protective and that the new owner really knows what they're getting themselves into. So just remember, the Superfund law does not provide the EPA authority to control who owns or acquires the property, nor the specific reuse of the property. And we just ensure that it doesn't conflict with the site restrictions. And so lastly, the state role, I'll just quickly go over it because Sarah and Lorenzo will cover more of DEQ's role. But normally, so McCormick and Baxter is a fund lead site, which means the EPA paid for the cleanup. The McCormick and Baxter Creosote and Company went bankrupt. And so EPA paid for the cleanup. And with fund lead sites, it's the state's responsibility to take on operation and maintenance of the remedy once the remedy has been completed. So McCormick and Baxter is a little different than most Superfund site or fund lead sites because DEQ actually was involved throughout the whole cleanup process, and they oversaw a lot of the cleanup efforts on the behalf of EPA. And so in this case, DEQ has a lien on the property for the costs it spent on the cleanup as well. So now Kat will go over some more specifics about McCormick and Baxter. She's been working with me on this project since 2019, so I'll hand it over to her.
Great. And can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, and thank you, Annie. That was such a good presentation. So as you've heard, Annie has asked me to talk specifically about the McCormick and Baxter site and the reuse efforts. And so I'm probably going to get a little bit detailed, a tiny bit detailed. So I'm going to ask for your forgiveness in advance. And if you have any questions, we're happy to address them at the end of the presentation. But as you heard, the McCormick and Baxter Creosoting Company property is still owned by the McCormick and Baxter Corporation. The property's been for sale for a very long time. And excitingly, over the last few years, several, whoops, is it to the next slide yet?
Yeah, we got it now. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. And so what I was saying is excitingly, over the past few years, several serious prospective purchasers have reached out to the property owner and to EPA and DEQ about potentially acquiring the property. And currently, McCormick and Baxter has signed an option contract with a prospective purchaser while that party conducts their due diligence on the property. And as you may have already gleaned, McCormick and Baxter is still an active corporation in Oregon and still owns the property, even though it is insolvent, it's gone through bankruptcy, and it ceased operations about 20 years ago. But this is not unusual for Superfund site properties. Site property normally stays in the ownership of the potentially responsible party until it's, sold. It can be donated. A lot of times it's auctioned off because there's delinquent taxes, and the county or the city will foreclose on the taxes, and it'll get transferred that way. Sometimes if it's owned by an individual, it's inherited by an heir. So there's a lot of ways that the property can transfer, but usually it's when the current owner, the PRP, either sells it or donates it. And I think my best analogy, and I always get in trouble with analogies because people poke holes in them. So this may not be the best one, but my best analogy is, if you can picture a house catching on fire, and then the fire department arrives to put it out and to protect the surrounding homes, which is great, right? They do their job. But afterwards, the fire department does not own the house. And the fire department doesn't have any say if the owner decides to sell the property or to whom. And the fire department doesn't even have control over what type of building is reconstructed on the property. Those types of decisions, right, are with the owner and with the local government who has zoning and permitting authority. And so similarly at this site, EPA and DEQ arrived to clean up a heavily polluted property. But afterwards, EPA and DEQ do not own the property. And EPA does not dictate how the property is used as long as the reuse is protective of the remedy. There has to be a compatibility between the reuse and the remedy. And back in 2001, and Annie mentioned this, EPA funded a really robust reuse planning effort for the site. And the purpose of these types of reuse assessments and planning efforts are often to help set goals for the cleanup. But if it's past that stage, it's could be really useful to allow local governments to hear residents' ideas for the site property, so that potentially the city or the whoever can change zoning and permitting. And also, as Annie mentioned, quite a few times local governments will have the opportunity to actually acquire the site for a public purpose. There's lots of municipal buildings, there's lots of parks, there's lots of recreation on Superfund sites that have been cleaned up. So this specific 2001 reuse planning report that covers on the slide there, this particular one concluded that most uses of the site would require at least $5 million. That's $5 million in access and transportation upgrades. And one of the recommendations was for the city of Portland to conduct a feasibility study to evaluate the costs and the benefits of acquiring the site as open space or as a park. To date, no local government agency has been interested or has agreed to take ownership of that McCormick and Baxter property, and probably for very, very good reasons, including that, you know, a lot of money would have to be put into it in order to upgrade the transportation. But luckily, as I mentioned, just in the last couple of years, there's been some pretty significant interest in the site by private entities. And EPA, you've heard this before, and I'll just keep reiterating it. EPA, you know, does not control local land use, and so EPA is pretty much required to remain agnostic about who buys the property. And EPA doesn't pick favorites. It's really up to the owner who they want to sell it to. The only thing that EPA is inserts itself into is that the reuse cannot interfere with nor damage the cleanup remedy. That's what EPA's interest is. So, you know, whenever a prospective purchaser arrives, EPA provides the exact same information to all prospective purchasers, because EPA really wants an informed buyer who can be a good steward on the property. And the same information includes the site restrictions, potential site responsibilities, liability protection options, and lien information. Everybody who comes in the door gets pretty much the exact same package of information. And let's just talk about for a second the Superfund federal liability protection options, because that is really, really important. That's one of the really important pieces here. And there's where I'm going to get a little bit detailed. And this is so important because if a new buyer or even a lessee takes control of Superfund site property without obtaining federal liability protection, there's a pretty significant risk of them becoming a responsible or a liable party at the site. And trust me, you do not want to become a potentially responsible party at a Superfund site. That is no good. And so most folks work really diligently to get their federal Superfund liability protection and then to maintain it. And there are basically two options for liability protections when the site property is sold or donated. There's other liability protections for other scenarios, but we're just going to stick with this right now, sold or donated. And the first is a statutory defense called the bona fide prospective purchaser defense. You might have heard of this. It's been around since 2002. It's also known as the BFPP defense. And then the second option is a federal prospective purchaser agreement, and that's also known as a PPA. So you'll hear a lot of acronyms around BFPP and PPA, and those are just two options for obtaining liability protection. And then I'll just quickly explain some of the pros and cons with those. The statutory BFPP defense, as I mentioned, was enacted by US Congress in 2002, and in a nutshell, requires that the prospective buyer or lessee strictly, and I'm going to emphasize that, strictly comply with 8 criteria that are listed in the legislation. And that includes obtaining a phase 1 before taking title, having no affiliation with a PRP at the site, taking reasonable steps to prevent and contain releases, and providing full cooperation with EPA and the state, including, granting access and implementing institutional controls. And the good news is that the BFPP defense authorizes cost recovery efforts for EPA through what is called a windfall lien. And that is still a possibility at the McCormick and Baxter site. It's really going to depend upon how the sale and the PPA play out. But I think the really important thing to note here for the community is that the BFPP defense was designed by Congress to be completely self-implementing. You might be like, what the heck is that? And what that means is that any prospective purchaser or lessee is solely responsible for their BFPP defense. EPA does not certify the defense. They don't give a piece of paper saying that an entity is a BFPP or not. In the end, only a judge can rule if someone has complied with the 8 criteria and has a valid defense. Unfortunately, there's been a series of court cases recently that went very badly for BFPPs because they did not strictly comply with those 8 criteria. So it is very important. And not surprisingly, some developers prefer the other liability protection option because it's actually a written and signed document. And that is called the federal PPA, or prospective purchaser agreement. And it's basically just a contract between EPA and the prospective buyer or lessee, saying that EPA will give certain liability protections in exchange for the buyer giving EPA direct site benefits. And so you might ask, what are direct site benefits? And they are defined as either conducting necessary cleanup work or cost recovery. So basically cleanup work, cost recovery, or some combination thereof. Unfortunately, public benefit is not allowed to be utilized as a direct site benefit in a federal PPA, but that doesn't mean that public benefit is irrelevant. Public benefit can still be very relevant for PPA, but it's utilized a little bit different. And so when we talk about public benefit, what do we mean? It could be returning the property to the tax rolls, could be creating jobs, could be creating affordable housing, or it could be like providing an easement for a greenway trail to go right along the Willamette River. So this type of public benefit can be utilized to help EPA determine whether entering into a PPA is worth EPA's investment of time and resources. So it's like the icing on the cake for EPA. And currently at the prospective purchaser, at the M&B site, the prospective purchaser has requested a federal PPA, and EPA has indicated at least an initial willingness to commence negotiations after a final purchase and sale agreement is signed with the owner. One valuable component of a federal PPA is that it includes a 30-day public comment period. And the public will be notified if and when a PPA comment period starts for the M&B site. And that is not what happens with the BFPP defense. There really is no public involvement prong because it is self-implementing. The purchaser doesn't even need to talk to EPA. I highly recommend you always talk to EPA before trying to acquire a lease or a title on a Superfund site. But that is one of the drawbacks to BFPP, is that there is no public comment period. So with that, I am going to turn it over to some fabulous DEQ folks to share the state perspective and its state PPA program. Over to you.
Thank you, Kat. And thank you to everyone who has put questions in the chat and in the room. I'm tracking all of them, and we'll get to them right after this next section. So our next presenters are with the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. And we have Sarah Miller, who is the DEQ Project Manager for the McCormick and Baxter site. Hi, Sarah, thank you. And also Lorenzo Danielson, who is the DEQ Legal Policy Analyst and Prospective Purchaser Agreements Coordinator. So I'll hand it off to you, Sarah and Lorenzo, and just tell me next slide.
Thanks. Go to the next slide. Okay. Like Laura said, my name is Lorenzo Danielson, and I'm the PPA coordinator as well as the legal policy analyst for the land quality division at DEQ. So I'll be providing sort of an overview of the PPA program. The program was instituted in 1995 by the Oregon State Legislature in order to facilitate cleanup and reuse of contaminated property. The program allows innocent parties to purchase contaminated property in exchange for substantial public benefit, as well as the requirement they meet certain criteria. Those criteria include, like I mentioned, the prospective purchaser is not currently liable for the contamination, that some sort of removal or remedial action is necessary, that the redevelopment or reuse would not exacerbate the contamination, and as well as a substantial public benefit as a result of the agreement. Typically, most PPAs do require a 30-day public comment period. And as I mentioned, substantial public benefit is a requirement However, that is a bit ambiguous and is not defined in statute, although examples are given. Some of those examples include funding for cleanup, a commitment to perform or conduct cleanup, as well as returning abandoned property to productive reuse. Next slide, please.
Hey, Lorenzo, we're getting just a few notes in the chat that your audio is just a wee bit choppy.
Oh no!
I don't know if you're able to maybe get a little closer to your speaker
Yeah, let's
or
see what I can do.
possible. We'll
Yeah.
pause for just a quick moment.
Any better now, or?
Maybe say something else.
How about now? Test, test, test.
I can hear you. It's just a little bit like you're somewhere else, but I can still hear you. So
There's an echo. There's
Yeah.
definitely an echo.
Okay, I don't really know how to address that.
maybe, yeah, you could try to turn off your video and see if that improves. You can try.
Is that any better? Am I still-
Another suggestion would be to slow your voice down a bit so that the choppiness is less.
Gotcha. Is this any better now, or?
Yeah.
No? Okay.
It is a bit, yeah, and Lorenzo, we'll just monitor if we still can't. Okay, it sounds like it is a little better. If
Yeah.
people are still having problems, we can also have you call in and I can send you the call-in information, or Scott can too.
Gotcha. Okay.
Thanks,
Um,
Lorenzo.
Yeah, I can go ahead and start from the top again. I do apologize for the.
I think we can probably go to the next slide.
Okay.
You were on to the next one, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So in the 25 years the program, 25 years that the program has been in existence, DEQ has entered into 246 total PPAs. Each PPA is very unique and requires its own specific scope of work and technical evaluation. So the agency does have quite a bit of experience dealing with PPAs and developing scopes of work in order to implement a PPA. Next slide, please. So this is sort of an example of what the PPA process actually entails. From the perspective of the prospective purchaser, they're participating in two negotiations simultaneously. First, the prospective purchaser is negotiating with the owner for the purchase and sale of the actual property. That is usually a private negotiation the DEQ is not a part of at all. Simultaneously, the prospective purchaser is also negotiating with the DEQ regarding the prospective purchaser agreement, which is the legal document that implements the program, as well as the scope of work, which is a technical document that details the activities to be conducted and performed in order to receive the liability protection. Once the requirements of the scope of work have been satisfied, DEQ would issue a certificate of completion, which acknowledges that the terms of the PPA have been met and that the owner now receives the liability protection. And that is the overview of the PPA process. So I will hand it over to Sarah now.
Great, thanks, Lorenzo. So if you wouldn't mind, I'm Sarah Miller. I am the DEQ Technical Project Manager on McCormick and Baxter. And
We'll give Sarah just a moment. I think she's I know, getting over a cold too, so it's one of the reasons why she's virtual this evening. So we'll wait just a moment for Sarah to come back on, and while we're waiting, thank you all. We have some really good again questions in the chat that I'm monitoring, and I think DEQ is almost done with their presentation, so we'll be able to get to those very quickly. So, hey, Sarah.
yeah, sorry about that. Hey, I'm getting over a cold here. So, excuse me.
No worries, take your time. And so if you want, there are a few questions if you wanted to get some water or something. I know we were gonna kind of go in order. I know there are questions in the room too, but if you do need a chance to get some water, there are a couple questions directed specifically to Kat. So I'm thinking we could possibly go to, okay, sounds good. So we'll go to those really fast. And then I have the other ones in the queue, so don't worry. I think the first one that was directly to Kat, and don't worry, Travis and Jackie, I have your questions, was from Doug. So Kat, you had an example, I think, about, Doug, do you want to, I saw you come off mute. Would you like to ask directly?
Oh, sure. Like you say, analogies are hard to pull off, but in your fire department analogy, which works great for a homeowner who has an electrical fire start or something and still owns the house. But this is one of those rare situations in Superfund where the guy that started the fire actually still has his name on the title to the property. So while EPA might be satisfied with putting the fire out, where are the police to arrest the guy that was the arsonist? And why does he own the property?
So, yeah, thank you for the question. And I definitely should not have used an analogy. It always comes back to bite me. And so, yeah, it's not meant to be literal, but I think I get what you're trying to say here is, why does the company that caused the pollution and was responsible for the cleanup, why do they still own the property? And that's because that is the way the law works. What EPA has as its power is to hold the company liable and to try to get the company either to clean up the mess itself or to get cost recovery from it. And in this case, some money did come from the company, but it declared bankruptcy and went out of business. And so now it's just a shell company, still maintained as an active corporation, but its only asset in Oregon is this piece of property that's heavily contaminated. And that is just how the law works. EPA does have lien authorities on top of its other authorities. And that's when I was mentioning the windfall lien. It's, one way or the other, the equity in the property will not go to the company. It will go to EPA and to DEQ to reimburse them at least partly for the cleanup costs that have been expended so far.
A quick follow-up. My problem with all this, I was told by EPA that the original cost of the cleanup was $50 million 25 years ago. So now the present value of that's over 100 million. That's the public investment in cleaning the property up. So I'm encouraged that you're suggesting that the owner won't make any money out of selling something that someone else spent $100 million on.
Yeah. I mean, it's not a lot of comfort, but at least no profit at all will go to the company. It will all come to EPA and DEQ.
Okay.
Thank you, Doug, and thanks, Kat. And Travis, I see your hand is up, but Sarah is back to feeling okay. So I think we're going to go ahead and go with Sarah so we can finish out this further presentation. Then we'll go to all the questions in the room and online. So Sarah, did you want me to go to the next slide?
Yeah, please do. I'm so sorry. I am
No
getting
worries.
over a cold here and it
Okay.
just came right up. So, and for some reason I can't start my video. So anyways,
Okay.
so yeah, so thanks everyone. So I'll kind of move forward with DEQ's perspective on McCormick and Baxter specifically. And so there are several big picture topics here that DEQ is thinking about when we're when it moves forward to a specific PPA at McCormick and Baxter. So as Annie previously mentioned, McCormick and Baxter is different than Portland Harbor. So that's something to recognize, and that EPA is, or I'm sorry, McCormick and Baxter, what is a EPA lead fund site. And so that means that EPA funds the remedy implementation, and then the state is responsible for that long-term operation and maintenance. And McCormick and Baxter, the remedy itself is highly engineered, and it must be maintained for many, many years. And so it's really important to DEQ that that purchaser is committed to the long-term stewardship of the site. The reuse has a low risk of damaging the remedy, and the purchaser fully understands the constraints and opportunities of McCormick and Baxter. So as we've been talking about, what we wouldn't want to happen, DEQ would not want to happen, is have this new purchaser, if they leave in some untimely way, DEQ would be legally obligated to EPA to resume the stewardship of the site. And so again, it's really critical to DEQ that the future prospective purchaser really understands and is committed to this site. There are also two other administrative documents that influences DEQ's lens when we're looking at McCormick and Baxter. First is DEQ filed a lien on the property in 2011, and this was an attempt to recover remedial costs. That lien continues to accrue unrecovered DEQ costs to the tune of about $6 million. The 1994 McCormick and Baxter property mortgage document also states that the current owner cannot transfer the property without DEQ's written consent. And this is really unique. It's the only cleanup or site in Oregon that has this interesting document that talks about DEQ. And so, but one thing to think about is that this mortgage was written before the PPA program existed. So DEQ has looked at both of these documents, and we do feel like the PPA process will satisfy both these unique administrative aspects of McCormick and Baxter. As Lorenzo mentioned, for DEQ's perspective, this prospective purchaser agreement will require some robust community engagement during the PPA process once that application has been submitted to DEQ and reviewed. And we definitely recognize that there is a substantial public investment in this particular site, and that there is community interest. So we are looking at that. And then finally, as Annie and Kat have mentioned, DEQ and EPA have fielded multiple inquiries for the site since remedy completion in 2005. And over the years, DEQ has prepared what we're calling a potentials term list or term sheet. And this provides a broad list of actions that DEQ would be looking for when we're creating that prospective purchaser scope of work. And, I'm repeating again what Kat said, that term sheet has been shared with all interested parties over the past few years when they've reached out with DEQ. And so next, I'd like to share the next few slides on that. And I apologize, there's gonna be lots of words on the next few slides, but these will generally outline the terms of what we would be looking for. So if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, that'd be great. All right, so we have kind of a couple of broad topics that DEQ is looking at when developing a potential terms for McCormick and Baxter. One has to do with redevelopment. And you can see here, there's several items here. Like we've been saying before, the reuse has to be consistent with the City of Portland zoning requirements. Whatever is proposed needs to not negatively impact the remedy. And if the future prospective purchaser would like to change the remedy design, it has to maintain functionality and protectiveness. For example, the current remedy does not accommodate significant overwater activities. So if that is something that the prospective purchaser is interested in, it would be on them to do the work to develop a feasibility and design to make sure that that use does not adversely impact the remedy. And then finally, here you can see multiple number of documents that would need to be submitted and prepared for DEQ review and approval. Site development documents at various design phases, monitoring and maintenance plans, contaminated media management plans, and then finally record on the property title itself an easement equitable servitude document, and that documents of what we call the institutional controls, like the groundwater use restrictions and DEQ access and those sorts of things. All right, next slide, please. All right. The next kind of broad category DEQ is looking at is maintenance and community engagement. So we would be looking for that potential prospective purchaser to maintain and monitor the soil operable unit and riparian area. So making sure the cap is still in place, doing riparian activities, making sure that the trees are all nice and healthy. We ask them to develop and maintain the Willamette River Greenway Trail, and then develop and implement a site community engagement plan. And we would ask that that plan include the local community, and then people who have been historically excluded from those community decisions. All right, next slide, please. And then finally, we are looking at this broad category of administrative items. One would be the financial assurance. Does this prospective purchaser have the financial insurance capacity to do the work on site that they're proposing? Also be looking for them to cooperate with the Department of State Lands in what's called resolution of formerly submerged lands. As you probably know, this was once Willamette River floodplains, and so that was at one point filled in, and so there's some administrative actions that need to occur to resolve those matters with the Department of State Lands. We'd be asking for reimbursement for past remedial costs according to the terms of that lien, but not to exceed fair market value of the property. And then finally, provide DEQ access and equipment space for remedy maintenance. And then once all of the potential terms of a prospective purchaser agreement is completed, DEQ would release that entity or the prospective purchaser from state liability and contribution protection, including natural resource damages. All right, I think that's it. So I think we're on to questions. I think that might be Laura. So thanks again, everybody, for making some good leeway time and asking questions there. Thanks again.
Thank you. So I know we're at 7:40, and Michael, council, I know there was another presentation by Portland Botanical Gardens, so please stop us once in the room, and Alyssa, you can help flag that when we need to move on to the next presentation. But I know we have till 8:30, so let's go back and forth kind of online and in the room. I'm going to stop sharing my screen just so we can see everyone. So I have some questions queued up online first, if that's okay, just one, and then we can go in the room. So one, just note that the presentations that were just given, I will be sharing them, Michael, with you and the CAG after. So everyone will have them. And so the first question that came in was from Travis. Williams, the Willamette Riverkeeper. And I think I'd start this one for you, for Sarah and Lorenzo at DEQ, and then Anne and Kat, if you want to add anything. So the question is, does the amount of public money that went into the cleanup have a role in deciding about the future use? As we know, significant public funds went into paying for this cleanup.
Yeah, this is Lorenzo. I can take that question.
Thanks.
So the amount of funds that have already been used aren't necessarily, I mean, they are a factor, but the driving factor from DEQ's perspective is that because there is no longer a viable responsible party, DEQ would assume the liabilities of the property should a sale not go through, meaning the agency would be responsible for future costs without the opportunity to recoup them through a sale. And so when we're looking at the future use, we want to make sure that the new prospective purchaser is a knowledgeable party who understands the issues regarding the controls, like the caps, and making sure those aren't perforated or damaged in any way. And so making sure that we have a knowledgeable and proficient purchaser and the future use complying with that in terms of not jeopardizing the protective actions or controls that have been taken.
Yeah, thanks, Lorenzo. I guess I just might add, you know, from DEQ's perspective, we're thinking about past costs, but we're also thinking about future costs. And so there's kind of this calculus that DEQ needs to do internally to figure out, you know, what is this potential prospective purchaser offering for future maintenance costs to reduce that burden on DEQ and the taxpayers. So, you know, so those are kind of the things that we are thinking about moving forward.
Thanks, Sarah and Lorenzo. Travis, I just want to go, does that answer your question? Or
Well, I mean, generally it does. I think it's the limitations of the law here really that are problematic that we're all working with. I would think there's a greater moral obligation, frankly, to, you know, make this property a public open space in addition to some other potential use. And that doesn't get well captured by any of this. And it kind of leads to a question regarding, you know, we had some funds back in 2001 to gauge community sentiment, and it seemed pretty clear that people wanted to park at this site. That's been an evolving discussion. And, you know, maybe there's a role for kind of a new community census, if you will, in regard to what people think would make sense at this site, whether it's some hybrid scenario that involves a lot of public open space free of charge with some other part of a development, if that's what it takes. And obviously I'm making that case here because I think what's gone on, frankly, is really, you know, kind of problematic. Here we are all these years later, and the entity that is still on the deed for some reason, because of Superfund law, gets to dictate what happens to this property. So, and I'm speaking on behalf of a lot of people who have definitely provided their concern and interest in this, like Doug Larson and many others over the years. I think this is really kind of problematic where we're at, how this is set up. And I do applaud, I should say, the EPA and the DEQ trying to work within the weird, rigid confines of this process. Where we are with the upcoming presentation necessarily makes sense for the future of the site. So, and that's my perspective at Willamette Riverkeeper.
thanks, Travis.
Thanks.
I want to go into the room next to see if there are questions, but Kat or Anne, did you want to add anything to just that piece?
Sure, this is Anne. I would just add, if the community members are still very interested in an open space, it could be worth making your case to the city or Metro or the county. The agencies have approached all three of those entities and they have not expressed an interest in owning the site. But if they heard significant public interest, that's reinvigorated at this moment, then, you know, maybe they would reconsider. We can't force them to own the property or purchase the property. So, you know, we can do what we can do, but our role is really just facilitating this. But if there is a strong public interest, I think, you know, the slides about the local government with their zoning and what they permit, and if they're even able to own the site, it could be worth the effort to approach those entities and express your interest.
Thanks, Dan. Okay, let's go to the room. Alyssa, is there a question in the room, or Michael?
Yeah, I think, I'm sure there are plenty of questions in here. I know Sarah Taylor has a question that she passed me earlier, and then I see Bob Salinger, your hand was up, so let's, all right. All right, Sarah, I'm hitting you first in my round around the table, so here you go. And if you could just introduce yourself to folks and make sure to hold that mic nice and close to your face.
Okay, this is Sarah Taylor. My question is, are they allowed to donate the space? You did use the word donate. So if they donate to a nonprofit, can that then waive the DEQ and EPA funds so that could just be given to the nonprofit? And I understand they would still have to do all the things that you outlined, but could it be a fair trade, you know, because the money is going to go to EPA and DEQ, but in actuality, that's our taxpayer money. So I guess the question is, can it just be donated to a nonprofit versus the city, the county, you know, or the state? Not sure who's answering me, but.
Thanks, Sarah. So yeah, so could the property be donated? Kat, I think maybe that would be a good question for you.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure, I can take a stab at it. And of course, I cannot speak on behalf of EPA or DEQ. This is just, you know, a general answer is that, yes, the property owner can always donate the land, right? That's not a problem. Whether the liens could be waived, that is going to be a discussion between the agencies and, you know, let's just use the nonprofit as an example. But I do know that agencies are usually more flexible with what they do with their past costs when there is a nonprofit that's going to bring a public use that's, you know, greatly supported. So that is a negotiation that would happen between the nonprofit and the agencies.
Thanks, Kat. If anyone, Lorenzo, Sarah, and anything you want to add on that? Or it was a good answer, so see, since okay, all right, we'll move on. Question in the room or online, excuse me, from Jackie Calder. Jackie, I'll go ahead and read your question, and then if you have any follow-up after the answer, just let me know. What redevelopment has been done since the original cleanup? And maybe Sarah or Lorenzo, you want to maybe start, or Kat? Which, Sarah, maybe you first.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I guess if I'm understanding correctly, I'm thinking of redevelopment. So let me know if this is what you are asking. But you know, there hasn't been any structural, other than the remedy and maintaining the remedy since 2005. You know, there hasn't been any actual redevelopment done on the site. We've been doing maintenance to make sure the fences are you know, maintained and just kind of day-to-day stuff, but there has not been any specific actions and redevelopment on site. Oh, Kat's got her hand raised.
Yep, go for it.
Yeah, and I saw a comment earlier in the chat that maybe reuse is a better term than redevelopment, and I actually went to a tribal lands conference and that exact point came up, and so I do like the word reuse better because I think it's more encompassing. The only thing I would add, Sarah is absolutely right, there has been no reuse of the site except habitat was put in along the shoreline, and maybe Annie can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So the area between the upland soil cap and the in-water sediment cap, we have a riparian buffer. And that, I think Sarah was already mentioning the maintenance of that riparian buffer will be a requirement for whoever the next owner is. So Kat is right, that vegetation was established. So in a sense, that area has been reused as habitat, and that riparian buffer will always be required to be maintained.
Thank you.
To clarify, if I might,
Sure, Jackie, go for it.
I just was curious if any additional cleanup had been done since the original, and I think you've answered my question that none, except for I remember when we were planting things there, but other than that, no serious additional cleanup.
That's correct, just maintenance.
Just maintenance. Thank you.
Thanks, Jackie. Let's go in the room. Alyssa, you said someone else had a question in the room, and then we'll.
Yeah, Laura, can you hear all right?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm going to pass the mic to Bob Salinger.
Thanks. Just a quick thought and a question. Public has put, tens of millions of dollars into this. And really, what's it doing now? Okay. The public has put tens of millions of dollars into this site. So it really does seem like the priority has to be very heavily put on public benefit. And especially because the value of this property is not very much. I mean, somebody's going to walk away with this property for very, very little money. A tiny fraction of what the public's invested. So that public benefit needs to be huge on this site. There have been a couple of nonprofits that have taken a run at this site and really haven't been able to even get through the door because there seems to be a line of other groups kind of holding it in a stasis. And that seems to have been going on for a very, very long time. So the first question is really, how do we start to break this thing free and really open it up to viable opportunities? And then when one comes along, move it forward. The second question is, I think one of the big impediments, especially for nonprofits, is the potential cost of monitoring and maintenance. And are there other mechanisms that the agencies would consider, including perhaps the state taking that on, DEQ, and not leaving that to a nonprofit in order to get this site into productive use?
Thanks, Bob. Either Kat, did you want to go first, or maybe Sarah? Which you want to give? Maybe, yeah. Which one of you would like to go first?
So I just wanted to clarify something that Bob just mentioned. And there was a nonprofit that made an offer on the property, and the current owner declined to sell it to them. And I think that's what Bob was talking about, and other folks may be in line. And right now, the property is under an option contract with the owner. And if they do not move forward and they do not get to the signing of a purchase and sale agreement, which is the next step that really locks them in, then the property is back on the open market again. So we'll be watching the situation and supporting whatever reuse. And I just keep saying that EPA, doesn't play favorites here. They're just supporting the reuse and making sure that whoever comes on the site is a good steward and doesn't negatively impact the remedy, as Sarah said. Sarah, do you want me to turn it over to you?
Sure. Yeah, I think I can answer the question. There was a question about, would there be the option of state state taking over the operation and maintenance in a part of the, if a prospective purchaser came on board and it was a nonprofit and there was all those factors. And again, I think it really depends on the actual detailed proposal that DEQ gets and what that looks like. We would need to kind of evaluate that. Is that really what the community is looking for? A nonprofit, and then DEQ taxpayers take on that that cost. We do try to make sure that that DEQ is being reasonable with taxpayer dollars. So again, we would just need to figure out what that proposal would be and evaluate that.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Kat. And thanks for that question, Bob. I know there are a couple questions in the chat about the buffer and the riparian habitat that we can go to, but I want to go, there are other questions in the queue, so maybe, and if you're able to reply.
Laura, I can just send a figure. They can see the elevations on a figure.
Sounds good. Sounds good. And I see iPhone 13, you have your hand up, but we'll see if there's time at the end, because I know we do have the Portland Botanical Gardens want to chat a little bit too. So the next question that I have in the queue from the chat online is from Catherine Martin, who had asked Kat during your presentation, why would someone pick a PPA over a BPP or vice versa?
That's a very good question. So it really is a matter of specific site risk management strategy. And from a developer's perspective, the BFPP defense is very fast, right? And it's fully within their control. They just have to comply with the 8 criteria. But most sophisticated developers are interested in a prospective purchaser agreement, a federal one, because it actually is it's an actual contract and it's in writing, and people like documents that are in writing. But a PPA is entirely at the enforcement discretion of EPA, right? And so certain criteria have to be met in order for an EPA to be entered into, and that usually means, significant site benefits. So it's always a site by site, evaluation, and so it really depends upon what the developer or the nonprofit asks for or wants to do, and then it's up to EPA if a PPA is requested, whether EPA wants to spend the time and resources to enter into that PPA.
Thank you, Kat. Is there another question in the room, Alyssa?
Yeah, we have one more question in the room, and then I think sorry. We have one more question in the room, and I think I want to maybe move to Portland Botanical Garden to do their presentation. And if our other guests, if EPA and DEQ could stick around for any additional questions, if they have the time or the capacity, because I'm sure there are more questions that folks would like to ask. I would like to go ahead and have the one additional question in the room asked, and then after that, we can move to the Portland Botanical Garden to do their presentation.
Sure, that sounds good. Yeah, that sounds good. There were only a couple other ones we haven't gotten to other than the riparian zone, so I think that's perfect.
Hi, Melissa Berry. My question is, if this PPA moves forward with this potential purchaser currently on the docket, and if I understand correctly, there will be a 30-day public comment period. What are the legal parameters around that public comment period that are enforceable by the EPA?
Thank you for that question. And it sounded like that was directed toward the EPA.
Yeah,
Yeah. Mhm.
yeah, I'm so sorry. I'm not entirely sure I followed the question. Let me give a stab at it and then you can clarify. But basically, there's a 30-day, normally a 30-day public comment period. And then EPA evaluates the comments, remembering that EPA does not control local land use or control how the property is going to get reused. So it often looks at these comments as to whether the public thinks that the direct site benefits are sufficient for EPA, the federal government, to provide a covenant not to sue from the federal government and contribution protection from any other PRPs that are out there. Does that answer your question?
Can you also just reiterate the direct site benefit versus public benefit, because they are different?
That's correct. So this is a little wonky, so forgive me again, but there's really two evaluation steps for EPA when it's looking at a prospective purchaser agreement. And the first is kind of what's called a threshold evaluation. Is there enough public benefit to make it worth EPA investing the time and resources into negotiating a PPA? And then the second evaluation, and this is really the important one for US DOJ, because US DOJ has to sign on to federal PPAs, and that is if there are direct site benefits. And that is basically one of two things or a combination, and it's either that the new owner is going to take on some sort of necessary cleanup work, or they're going to provide sufficient cost recovery, or a combination of the two. So the public benefit is kind of just like a threshold, but it's not in the end what determines whether a PPA is has sufficient consideration, and that is direct site benefits, cleanup work, and or money.
Thanks, Kat. Michael, I'll turn it over to you, and if you want to see if there's additional follow-up on that question, feel free, but I'll passing it back to you for the.
For sure. Thanks for that. Any follow-up to that? Good. Okay. All right. And so now we're going to go ahead and move to Paul Hogan with Sean Hogan with Sean Hogan with Portland with Portland Botanical Gardens here. So there we go.
All right. Thank you so much. I will speak into this hopefully clearly. Well, we really appreciate the invitation. And I think we would, first of all, reiterate that yes, a lot of public effort and a lot of public money has gone into this site. And we are pretty excited about providing the highest and best use for the site. I'm here with Sarah Gardner, who has so much land use planning and other experience, with Jennifer Capello, who's our community outreach person and a resident of St. John's, and Matt Taylor as project management. So if I get stumped, they can kick in. I think first of all, this site is not new to anybody in this room. It's such an interesting site. It has so much history. It needs a little love. It's also in a site that is possibly the most, if not one of the most disinvested districts in our entire city. And it's a neighborhood that needs a little love as well. I think I first visited the site in about 1996 or 7 with people from Parks and instantly fell in love with it. And I'm sure there were all kinds of things still oozing out of the ground at that point. But it was beautiful nevertheless. And really, as we all know, we haven't maybe historically done the best job at embracing our water and our river, either for natural sites or for bringing people to the water. And also, there aren't a lot of 50 acres left in our city. What we've gained from having our successful urban growth boundary, we've lost by having not the easiest of development of large sites. So we are not Atlanta. We can't just go out and make another place. And I think we're for that. But this site has been our favorite site for some time. Not only, but it's certainly our favorite. So in thinking, and of course we're biased, but we think we certainly have a highest and best use for the site. We've got a few missions in mind, and I think they are capped by one overarching mission, and that is the physical aspect of the site. I am fixated on the surroundings, the very fragile habitats that are the bluffs. What Olmsted wanted to see as part of the string of pearls. Little bits and pieces, and I could geek out here for a long time, but little shreds of the California floristic province, and there's just almost none of that grassland or dryland left anywhere in the valley, of course, less than 1%, certainly not in Portland. And it's been so interesting, with interest from not only other entities around the world, but locally, but with people or entities like BES who are so interested in having these places brought back to as close to a natural state as we can get. We are, part of our sort of foundation is that we want to sort of be a guarantor of public open space that is not fee driven. And we also want to make sure there is access to the water by the neighborhoods, and that we not only provide but add quality and just, let's say, upgrades to the greenway that does go through the property. So we want to do a lot of things. Aside from that, missions are really fourfold. One, cultural. We have a lot of extremely interesting and diverse communities in Portland. I think, like most of you, if you've been here, if you're an old timer here and you've been here for more than, say, 2 weeks or 10 days, you remember the restaurant that used to be such and such, that used to be the diner, that used to be something else? Well, we've lost a lot of our places people meet. And so it's always been a bit of a fantasy for a lot of us to have essentially what we see as a social and horticultural speakeasy. We want people from all over the region, all over the city, to see it as a warm and fuzzy place, essentially to bond over plants your grandma grew, essentially, among other things. I curated the Chinese garden, if you've been there. And one of the things I learned that is, as we all eventually learn, that nothing is simple. There were many, many communities that built that garden, and there have to be many communities that build this one. We are having sort of a one step after another moment now. We have wanted to do, and this is sort of me, a lot of homework before we've reached out to every last community. And part of that is public entities as well as private have a tendency to be really good at the advertising now, but if you look under the covers, there isn't a whole bunch there. We want to make sure that every piece of paper that's lifted, we are just packed with information about our goals, about our intended actions, and about what will happen on specific sites or any site we're on. We are dovetailing that within reaching out to community, because that's where, of course, it's really going to count to see what people want as they build that site. So the cultural aspects are going to be so important. Education is also really high on our list. Portland does not have a higher level biological sciences program when it comes to botany. Nowhere in the city, nowhere in the region, nowhere in the state. That's dumb. So we want to have an education program there that is on par with the best in the country. We have partners around the world, around the country, and around the region that are willing to put a lot out to help us make that happen. We are looking at a very strong pre-K program, K through 12, and that is also university track, but there's a word here. Vocational. Thank you. It's a simple word, but vocational, and that is horticulture, for instance. It's kind of an interesting thing. It is a huge sector of employment. We're the country's leader in, for instance, the nursery industry. We have a huge horticultural employment here. It's not well paid, and part of it is because there isn't a lot of expertise out there. We intend to make people incredibly well educated about not only how to prune a branch, but how to grow things, so they can go out in the world and actually make a good living at horticulture. And that includes trees, climate resilient plants, other things for a very changing climate. Conservation will dovetail in with that. We want to have a very strong research and conservation program, looking at plants. Everything in the garden will have data, and we'll then reach out to various natural areas, both locally and around the state. And really on top of that, and possibly most kind of near and dear to the community, is jobs. Of course, the garden will create jobs for a lot of activities we see within the garden itself. We're also looking at secondary employment, for instance, the downtown business district. We envision a lot of people having lunch at Slim, I'm just saying, among other places. So we want to have more bodies coming through St. John's and really taking advantage of the businesses. We had a lot of support, for instance, from the Port of Portland, who not only see this as creator of employment, but a reason to bring more people to Portland. You might have noticed maybe once or twice that we're getting a little bit of a bad rap on the news network and that kind of thing. We really want to create something bright and shiny for Portland. They're looking at international commerce as well. We want to get a few more international flights into the airport because they have to come and see the botanical garden. And so they're just, there are a lot of dovetailing reasons. We want this to exist in Portland in general. And personally speaking, we want this to exist in North Portland, in this neighborhood. And really, when it comes to those jobs, the vocational aspect of it, we want to create the opportunity for people that are well educated in botany, in horticulture, and all other aspects that are related to go out into the community, not only help the community, but make a living at it. So I think that's a 7-hour spiel in a couple of minutes. Hopefully, as many people as possible have checked out the website of the garden, which covers things fairly well. And any of you have gone through the slog that was our presentation. Did we use one for the Hardy Plant Society or the St. John's? Okay. So there's a lot of information there and 2 jokes. So there's that. Anyway, that is really kind of a higher level feel about what we want this thing to be and where we want it to be. So I think we can take questions, and people with a lot more expertise than me in various aspects can just hopefully step in.
Come upstairs. I know that we have I'm on my phone, but it's in Zoom, and there's a question in the chat, and it's how do you define highest and best?
How do we define highest and best use? We have a limited piece of property in a city with not a lot of large pieces of property. We have one that a lot of public expense has gone into, and we have a community both broader and locally with many needs. This is an opportunity to create many services for people, really sort of onion skins into one physical place. And some of it is low-hanging fruit. We're the only major city in the world without a botanical garden. So some of these sort of no contest moments, but other things, it means we have a chance to build something that is not your grandfather's botanical garden, and in a new way. So hopefully that's not jumping around the answer, but
Can help with that too.
oh, thanks.
So,
This is Sierra Gardner.
hi, Sierra Gardner. I worked in industrial land in the city and the state of Oregon for many years, as well on. So we're defining the highest and best use for this site because it has the botanical garden, because it has local access to public transportation, which was a key priority for us. It has a open space zoning and then general employment. So this is not a industrial project, this is a nonprofit. And then this is a project that meets the criteria. It's pretty light development, so it would not have a huge impact on the riparian.
Right. And so I think we're gonna talk. We have about 15 minutes left for questions, and I hope can hear me online. So what I'm going to do is just answer the question from online. I'm going to come here into the room and see if there are any questions here in the room, and then we'll look back into the chat. I know there are some questions for the Botanical Garden. So any questions here in the room? Carla? Just a short little question. Have you thought about access from the river by recreational use folks and how they would use the river beaches? And then secondly, how that significantly right there at the barrier between the water and the land, how that would be possibly seen as, how are you approaching native plantings and especially informed, are you looking to be informed by native community in addressing that?
Presentation and all of it. Okay.
Just cover whatever you want.
All right. Well, I was gonna speak to native plant communities. As we desire to be an accredited public garden, everything we plant will have data, for one thing. It would have plants from around the world, comparing things from everywhere. But the edges, as it were, the riparian areas, the uplands, probably the open areas, would be plants that are taken. Anything that is still extant on site would be re-vegged from the site. And for instance, just to be a little geeky, those areas that I think some people were involved in planting some 20 years ago, there are some of the most beautiful madrone and oak stands forming there. We could change that. And so what we'd want to do is probably enhance the collections with additional natives through there, but really be very careful with the native planting or native communities.
Yeah, the second one would probably be controlled or welcome.
Hi, this is Scott Burr. The talk in the room is a little garbled. If you could please restate that comment. Thank you.
I apologize. I was just saying that I asked two questions, it's true. But so then my second question was, how would the Botanical Gardens address the fact that people do come up and down the river on kayaks and canoes and boats, and what would you do for that?
So we certainly wouldn't limit that. We believe that area is more of a city easement anyway, the riparian area up to the Greenway. So we wouldn't really necessarily be able to control it, but we would certainly welcome guests coming by way of river and enthusiastically, encourage it. But we have spoken with a few entities that have tried in the past to start new riverway transit opportunities, and we're hoping that they come through. And as you know, it's a political issue, but we would love to see that.
Pass the hot potato. I'm going to look to my colleague. Actually, I can see online. It looks like Cassie Cohen, you have your hand up. Cassie, do you have a question?
Yes. Have Portland Botanical Gardens folks, have you considered the opposition that exists already in the community and the tribal level for your concept, and what, like, kind of how are you processing that? And Davis Washines, who's an elder of the Yakima Nation, expressed opposition and concerns for your proposal, and we support the tribal's perspective. So can you kind of speak on that, please?
Well, I don't think we have received like an official letter of non-support from an elder that I can recall. I haven't seen that. We would definitely welcome any, we're here today because we want feedback. So we definitely want feedback. Hopefully we're not just, here representing our hearts to closed minds. And we do hope that people will consider this before we haven't presented yet.
This is my first time. But yeah, we would love to hear feedback, absolutely. And we are definitely open to exploring relationships there.
I think the concerns are primarily the plants coming in from around the world, the plants and the trees coming in from around the world, when it's been an extreme challenge to get native rehabilitation of, you know, what used to be present there along the entire stretch of the Portland Harbor Superfund site. So that's the priority, front and center, that we've heard time and time again from Yakima Nation, especially, who's very involved in cleaning up the river and regenerating the salmon and the lamprey and all the species in the river. And, you know, Portland Harbor Community Coalition has been supportive of habitat as well, greater habitat. And, you know, native habitat is really the priority, not habitat from around the world.
Well, I think I can say at least one thing that none of us could argue with, and that is there could be no possible better steward and provider of the right native plants for the right places that are native to the site than we are. There's no one with more expertise and the ability to reestablish the native habitats in that area. And as far as things planted that are not native, you can be assured they would be self-contained. And it's one thing we also have in our midst quite a bit of expertise on are things that are potentially invasive and how to get rid of things that are already invasive. So it's extremely important to us. And we certainly do hope that before not liking it, they'll ask us what we intend to do. And we'll be able to tell them what we hope to do.
All right, so it looks like we have two more questions in the room here.
Hi, it's Melissa again. Just to tack on to Cassie's comment, and I did watch your video, and thank you. There was a lot of good information in that video. But I think to address that, I think from a cultural standpoint, I was kind of struck by in the video the responses related to well, are not related to, let me just say it like that, to the cultural aspects in the design. Someone in the video, I'm not sure who it was, but spoke to audiences once the botanical garden would be open, but there wasn't a lot of discussion about cultural influences in the actual design and the sensitivities that are going to be woven into the design were you to go forward. So I just think from a public standpoint, that seems very, was lacking in the understanding of the sensitivities of the community.
Notes. I mean, this is the information that we're here. This is what we want to know. It's, you know, what is it that the community is expecting, and you know, this is an open-ended conversation.
And these are things we need to know before design even starts.
Yeah.
I know you don't have your design, and I know we're encouraging you to reach out with your design, but did you have some sense of acres or percentage that might be open riparian area versus, you know, a botanical garden that represents different places, cultures in the world?
Did everybody hear that question? What percentages might the garden take? We're looking at the majority of the site being native and native restoration. We're looking at, my guess right now is about 20% of the rest of the garden site would be representatives of plant communities from around the world that are mirrors of our own climate. So people understand exactly what things are like elsewhere. And I think an example of that, there might be things that aren't of our climate, is we have a Japanese and a Chinese garden with an incredible amount of cultural history to them. We would like people to see what it looks like outside the walls of that garden. So it's sort of it's funny, we are very native and very exotic in a smaller scale, kind of all at the same time. Then we've got, of course, classroom facilities, research, and conservatory. So people can be inside at various functions and all of that, which is probably another couple of acres. So we're probably looking, this again, the design is not done, and we don't have all of our due diligence, but we're certainly looking at probably 20 to 30% garden, and the rest is rehabbed and enhanced and open space. If that, don't hold me to within 1% there, but
I just think that's helpful. I think it's helpful for people to see what that might be.
Thanks. And Sarah was just saying that she thought it would be helpful just for folks to have an idea of what that might be. So thank you, Sarah, for your question. I want to hop back into online questions right now. It looks like, Tom, your hand is up. I'll pass it to you.
I'll lower it, thanks. So looking forward to when you want to talk to the University of Park Neighborhood Association. And we have our meeting on the 24th of April. So that would be a good time to make a presentation. It's at the Child Center. You might know where that is. So yeah, that was it. I'm looking forward to seeing access, because this is not an easy site to access. Number of vehicles, you know, when you start talking about having a garden that visitors are going to come and see, that's significant issues with respect to that. So those are the main concerns from the neighborhood's point of view for University Park. So there'll be others, but that, you know, we have to start that dialogue. And I didn't get anything out of the I mean, I haven't seen the fullness of the presentation, but yeah, I'd love to talk to you guys more. This is from the land use point of view, and also as chair of the neighborhood association.
The Greenway Trail could also ease some of the.
And I assume you'd want to talk to the University of Portland as well. And I'm assuming you've worked with Metro, because those are your two neighbors on land.
Yes, we've talked to them. And the Greenway Trail might be able to alleviate some of that car congestion.
All right, folks, we only have another couple of minutes. So for our last question, Travis, I see your hand is up. If you have any remaining questions, just go ahead and drop those in the chat. I know that we are tracking those and can make sure that those get to the folks that they need to get to. But in our last minute, I'd like to pass it back to Bob Salinger here.
We're gonna Travis go, or?
It's up to you.
Yeah, Bob, I think you're probably going to comment on the same thing I would, so go for it.
Travis has talked a lot, PS.
Not so much, but thank you for your view.
Bob Salinger, Willamette Riverkeeper. Sean, I really appreciate your enthusiasm. I met with you individually and your crew, and I appreciate the time you gave me. I guess the question I really have for you is, I came away with a concern that there isn't really a there right now. You have a great vision, but you also, from my understanding, don't really have any funding yet. You don't have real design plans. It seems like it's a long way to go. And in the meantime, groups are coming in that are pretty interested and pretty viable, and then leaving because it's just going to take forever. And you seem to have it locked up, to be very candid right now, along with you know, with your relationship with Charlie. This community is really desirous of moving forward. We haven't had a single site open up on this river in the 20 years that Superfund has been going on. This is one, the one next door is the other. It's taken forever. And so my question to you is, are you really ready to go? Is there a there? Do you have your financing? Have you really looked into all the different technical issues with this site, the access, because it doesn't have good access, it's been noted, and all these other things? Or are you holding the site kind of hostage at this point so that no one else can move forward while you kind of think about what you're going to do? I know it's a harsh question, but I think that's the question that's really on the community's mind.
No, Bob, I think we expected that. No, we're certainly not holding it hostage, but I can assure you there's a there. So watch this space.
How much money do you have?
$5.
How much is it going to cost?
$7. We got some fundraising to do.
I know, I'm not joking around.
Yeah, it's a legitimate question. For a nonprofit that's been around barely a year.
Yeah.
At least
Hi,
501(c)(3).
hi,
And
Bob.
you're not the one with the option, right?
Yeah.
Who's that?
I'd
Who's
say,
the choice?
no. Okay.
We want to know who the option is. Now we're scared. Who has the option?
That's something you probably want to talk with DEQ about.
Well, I want to know who has the option. I mean, I'm serious. I am serious about wanting to know who has the option. Because
I'm sorry,
I
there's
look
talk going on in the room that the folks online cannot hear.
Okay, we need to know tonight who has the option. We have had bad things happen on this river, and we need to know who has the option, because that's a very serious thing for us to know. And we should have known it a long time ago. I mean, this is not the day that we find out. We kind of assumed that the botanical garden was the option. And so now I hope somebody tells us right now who has the option.
Thanks, Sarah. I do also want to note that we are at time, so I want to give Portland Botanical Gardens an opportunity to respond and then pass it back to EPA and DEQ if they'd like to hop in. So I'll give it back to Portland Botanical Gardens right now.
Yeah, I think for that, it's in EPA DEQ's lab.
Oh, yeah. So I just want to say I'm pretty new to this project. This is Matt Taylor speaking. I know some of you and Travis and Bob. The conjecture around no there and the characterization of hostage and all that. I would ask a little more time to understand, the whole team, the funding environment, and how this gets done. It's all like a big long domino, and it's hinging right now on some kind of win-win outcome for the property. And I've wanted to say those are great questions tonight. The website has a lot of information. We're going to retool and try to answer more proactively through, we do have design. Everything's conceptual. It's not even for that one property. So, give us some time and space as well. It's not 1 year old. And let's be accurate about all of the characterization, because there's a lot of good faith efforts going into this and money. So,
Okay, let's find out.
Okay, Melissa, it sounds like you're passing it back to us, DEQ and EPA.
Before we hop off, I just wanted to give EPA and DEQ an opportunity to weigh in if they'd like to.
Sure,
Yes.
This is Anne Christopher. I just wanted to reiterate the process that we talked about in our slides, and DEQ also had it in their slides, that we don't negotiate prospective purchaser agreements until there's a purchase and sale agreement. That purchase and sale agreement is a private negotiation between the site owner and whoever the new entity is. So it's not actually the agency's authority to disclose the negotiations of that private agreement to the public. Once that agreement is signed and the agencies start talking about PPAs, that is when the public involvement process would start. So unfortunately, unless the entity itself or the site owner would like to disclose that document and negotiations, which I'm sure the document has language in there about not disclosing it. So unfortunately, we're just not in a position to share that information. Kat, feel free to jump in.
Thanks, Annie. EPA tries to stay out of the private property transaction and let the private market handle that, and that could be considered what's called confidential business information. So I think the best solution is maybe to ask the owner of the of the property, and see if they are willing to disclose.
Thank you. Pat and Sarah, I know you asked that question. I'm sure that's not a satisfying answer, but that is what we can say and a potential solution. So thank you for asking that. And there were a lot of other questions and feedback in the chat for Portland Botanical Garden. I just want to flag that that we were tracking that, Michael, so we can share it with you after to share with Portland Botanical Garden folks who are there. And because I know there were some other questions like we talked about that didn't get answered, so I got some folks' emails too for that. So pass it back to you. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to ask, do you guys want to put your email into the chat so that people can just be able to copy your email? If you want to put your email into the chat there. And there is a link to the Portland Botanical Gardens website that's in the CAG announcement, so you could all as well be able to reach out to them with additional questions there. But I think we are at time tonight. Our guests are actually putting that information into the link right now. And if there are any additional questions, please put those into the chat. We will look at those and send those to the appropriate parties. This is all being recorded, so we have all that data to be able to make sure that folks get their inquiries satisfied. But with that, I think we're going to go ahead and call this a really successful evening. This has been a great meeting. I'm very, very grateful for our guest showing up tonight. And thank you, EPA, thank you, DEQ, thank you, Portland Botanical Gardens, and thanks for a great lively audience. There's been, a wonderful group of folks have showed up tonight, not just online, but also in person and in our new space. So it feels really good. Please check out the announcements that were at the top of the chat. Please come down and see us here at Green Acres and see the new site as well. I can't think of anything else unless there are, Laura, is there anything that DEQ or EPA would like to say before we call it a night?
Michael had something to say. This is Scott Burr.
Hey, Scott,
So I just wanted to say, I like to observe what's happening in the dynamic of the meeting and body language and such. But one thing I wanted to say is there was across the room and across the comments, there are people in the room and on this meeting that have they're a member of the community, but they have substantial biological expertise. And some of the objections that I heard, they're real strong those objections are very strong in the community. And so I just wanted to restate that because it's very important that if the community is being heard, that people understand it's not just coming from, a person that's sitting next door. It's a person who has substantial expertise, the same kind of expertise that was being discussed that is resident with the botanical garden folks.
Okay, well, thank you for that. That sounds like a good way to end the evening. Thanks, everyone. Everyone take care of each other.
Hey,
And,
Michael, this is Ann. Just one last thing. I put my email in the chat as well. So if people do have more questions about the redevelopment process, obviously we said there are some private negotiations that we can't disclose, but we had the 2 presentations earlier. So if people do still have questions about the process, please reach out to EPA and DEQ and we can continue to answer your questions. The impetus for this meeting was because we received some emails with questions. So I'm hoping we covered a lot of the questions, but if there are more, definitely reach out.
Yeah, I'm sure that there's more for sure. And thank you so much. Thank you for being here. And thanks everyone for taking out the time to join us tonight. Everyone take care of yourselves and take care of each other. And we'll be seeing you again next month or at the end of the month, actually. So we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.